how obviously this is an adaptation of a memoir, and how did the project get started? Whose idea was it to option this material and make that?
The producer should take this one.
Hi. Well, the book was, David Lipsky's memoir was sent to me by a literary agent. Can you hear me? In Hollywood, a guy called Nick Harris. He sent me over a book and said, nobody knows what to do with this book, and everybody in my office thinks I'm crazy for trying to do something with this, but I think you'll like it because you're snotty. So I read the book, and I was about 15, 20 pages in, and I had this extraordinary sense that a friend and client of mine named Donald Margulies would love it, that it would speak to the deepest parts of who he is as a person and as a creative person. So I just called him up and said, I'm reading something fantastic. I'm going to send it to you right now. Start reading it, call me in the morning. And he called up that evening and said he loved it and he saw it as a movie. And he wanted to get started on it right away. And I then said, well, we got to find some money because nobody in Hollywood's going to make this movie. And I asked my colleague, Matt DeRoss, if his friend, James Segel, who was looking for some really specific projects to get involved with, would like it. And I think in a very short order, he came back and said not only was he interested, he was a huge David Foster Wallace fan.
David called me and said, I heard you're a Wallace fanatic. I said, that's true. It was on.
And really what happened is Donald, we secured the rights from David Lipsky, and we got to know him, and Donald got to know him. They spent quite a bit of time together, and Donald wrote maybe all of 3 drafts of the script before we felt collectively it was ready to go out and find the creative people to bring to the movie, starting with the director. And he mentioned very casually that he'd had a student who was an undergraduate at Yale many years ago, was a student in playwriting, who was a super talented guy. Do we know who James Ponsoldt was? And I actually knew the name, typical Hollywood response. I had heard of him, heard of the guy, but I had never seen Smashed, and went out and rented it that night. And the movie is, I don't know if you've seen it, but it's an extraordinary movie. Amazing. And we met with this gentleman, and he went off to Sundance to launch Spectacular Now. We had the opportunity to see the movie in Los Angeles right after the film festival, and were, if possible, even more blown away by him. And said, let's go make this picture. And that's really about the simplest story ever, and it's completely true.
And was it that simple for you to get involved with the film when they offered it to you?
Yeah, I mean, I had read it just my freshman year of college. Came out in '96. I started college in '97. I was an English major. Everybody who was an English major at that time was trying to treat it with jest, and I sort of holding it at least as this totem. And I think it's 4 or 5 months of really wrestling with it, and I felt like I'd been in when I finished a very complicated freshman relationship, not with a woman, but this book and this person who'd written it. And I fell in love with Wallace's writing and read everything. I get my hands on after that, and even at my wedding, I had his writing read. So I'm a super fan, and I really admire Lipsky's book. So when Donald reached out to me, I was very nervous and excited. I sort of was very focused on something else, and Donald's an amazing writer, and I knew he probably had done something special with it. And he's really hit me in the gut, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I was terrified of it because Wallace's fans are very passionate and articulate on Twitter and everywhere, and people with strong ideas, as they should, very proprietary. And I include myself in that group, but we've been making films about things that you love and things that terrify you, and this is both.
So, I mean, obviously, you have to set those things aside when it comes time to make the work, but I guess I just want to know what your approach was to the reality of the David Foster Wallace, that the reality of the book that you were adapting, and then your creative input, meaning you have to make the piece your own as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agreed that if the audience had to know the writing of David Foster Wallace or David Lipsky to appreciate the movie, then we'd fail. So for me, I think what's very universal about it. I mean, when I read it, I was like, oh, it's a relationship story, and it's an unrequited platonic love story, is what it is for me. And I think it's it's a very. I mean, I don't like biopics. Cradle to the grave sort of biopics I find very reductive and flattening of complicated human life. But this is a very subjective take about how David Lipsky was affected by his time with Wallace, which I thought was a unique take. The entire film really is from his perspective, and I think there's something very universal. Not many people, myself included, will write a 1,079-page novel, but we might at some point come in contact with someone who we've romanticized, idealized, like compared ourselves to, who reveals our own insecurities. We've all gotten to spend some time with someone like that, whether it's an artistic figure or a relative that we haven't talked to in forever, whatever it is, and we realize that their own sort of messy humanity complicates the relationship, and they're a lot different than we conceive of. So that was sort of the approach. It was a strong desire to not just have it be two smart guys talking at each other and trying to outdo each other. Have a film that didn't just exist from the neck up.
And what about you, Jason? Were you a David Foster Wallace fan of any kind?
I've read a lot of the short form, supposedly something I never do again, and the Lobster, but I hadn't tackled it from the chest. And I think that's a lot of people's experience. When I bought the book at a small bookstore, there was like a very ghost world kind of girl sitting behind the counter, and I set Infinite Jest down, and she rolled her eyes at me, and she said, "Infinite Jest, every guy I've ever dated is an unread copy of this book." Truly, she said that. And so I set off to read it with a group of friends. I started a book club, and it was a really beautiful experience. I mean, it's strange to talk about how like tender it was, because we would read 100 pages a week, and 4 grown men of my age would sit around and talk about loneliness and things like that. And that's what really hit me most of all, because it's very similar to the themes in the movie. This idea that sort of what we've been promised is going to address this feeling of I'm not enough, doesn't seem to fulfill that promise. So that just really.
And I was just, it just feels like I love the film so much, but I can set aside the pressure of having a lot of people in the outside world having expectations about what the movie is going to be. And I feel like that's a pressure on this film that it isn't on a lot of others. But again, it's not, I don't really know what the question is, because you have to ignore that. So I guess the question is, how do you set that aside in terms of deciding, for instance, how you're going to approach the character? You're going to make it as realistic as possible.
Well, first thing I did was I stopped looking at the internet in any way, and I rented a house outside of Los Angeles. So I tried to remove any reminder that this was like a work endeavor. You know what I mean? And I tried to just focus on the parts of us that are the same, and approach it with real empathy and love. But I felt like when I read Infinite Jest, it's a man saying, "Does anyone else feel this way?" Over and over in myriad ways. Does anyone else feel this way? This is how I feel, and I did feel that way. I felt exactly that way. Like I work in a job where the highs are very high and lows can be low, but I found after I started when I was 17, so 35 now. I was 34 when I did this. So 17 years of that, and I realized none of it really addressed the more visceral sort of human feelings of I don't feel like enough.
Okay, there are microphones in the audience, so if you raise your hand, they will bring you a mic. while they're getting to you. So you shot on location. Were there any difficulties or?
Yeah, we shot in the upper Midwest, in Michigan and Minnesota, and one day in New York, in the dead of winter during what was called World War X. They called it. Very descriptive term. Felt appropriate. We were near Lake Michigan, and it's a road movie where the majority of the crew is on a process trailer while the actors are in a car, and it was 10 to 15 below zero most of the time. We had a really amazing crew, most of them from Detroit, and they were used to it. And I'm kind of a wussy guy from the deep south. So, no, the weather was, there were moments we had, weather, wind was knocking things over. It was tough, but there's harder jobs out there. So it looks pretty on film, right? That's why we went there.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right.
Great film. Thank you so much. I'm just curious, can you give any details about why the Rolling Stone article was published or any details on that?
Yeah, my understanding is it was killed because it really wasn't juicy enough. For any number of reasons, I actually interned at Rolling Stone when I was in college, maybe at a low point for them musically speaking. Around 99, 2000, like Limp Bizkit, Britney Spears, were kind of the meat and potatoes of that magazine. There was music, especially Limp Bizkit and Korn, that was not going to age well. But, occasionally someone would slip in something, like PJ O'Rourke would write something, or something would have teeth, but it would also get pushed out for a boy band article for any number of reasons. I don't think it was any really exciting reason. I can say, David Lipsky was a really great resource for us at Sundance. He was asked about this, and he said, when he found out that the article was being killed, he felt relief. He felt that David Foster Wallace really was a bit annoyed by the end of it. And I think he, when he called David Foster Wallace's agent, he was sort of felt that there was some pressure on because Wallace felt like he could feel too much. I think a couple months after this article should have run, it was pointed out to me that David Lipsky did have a cover story for Rolling Stone about heroin in Seattle. So that's the kind of media article that makes it.
Go in the back.
Yes, I love
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Yes.
No, they didn't. They never spoke. It was a very ephemeral relationship. Lipsky went on to he did write obviously about Wallace, both his book. It was sort of a catalyst to some degree for this book was that after David Foster Wallace passed away, it's the irony of it. Rolling Stone asked David Lipsky to write an article, finding that they were intent on publishing. And he did write an article, a beautiful article. I'm going to mangle the title. I think it was the Last Days and Lost Year. David Foster Wallace won a National Magazine Award. It's really pretty stunning, and that sort of compelled him to find these tapes sitting in the closet. Thank you for the question.
Hi. The audio is very powerful in the film. Did you have access to any of those tapes?
Yeah, we had access to all of the tapes. And they were, Jason can speak to this, but I got them first for Dave Lipsky and then made them available to Jason and Jesse.
Yeah, it was a really important thing to be able to listen to this because the thing that really comes across is that some of it's really fun. It's two guys in a car together who are young and who pop culture is sort of like the great equalizer for those two guys during that trip. And they can play mental chess without really having to probe anything that is painful. So there are huge sections where they're literally like talking about the Hanson brothers. I swear. And that was really important because I really felt like, and James and I talked about this a lot, but you need to want to be in that car. If you want to get out of the car, then you're not going to enjoy the movie. And so I think that was what I took most from it. And then, there were parts where David Foster Wallace just sounds done, just irritated. Like, this guy has been kind of yapping at him for 4 days, and he's ready to be done. But what struck me most is how fun it was and how smart they were. I mean, I would have loved to have been in the car. It was the best conversation I've ever heard.
I have a question for the editor. The movie, which I love, is one of the reasons I love it is the whole movie is a great conversation and unusual in that it's almost strictly chronological. And I would think that most movies are complicated in their structure, they go back and forth, and you're just having two guys talk to one another. As film, what was the challenge of making that an interesting piece of cinema?
What I'm almost always trying to do in movies that have characters who talk to each other is to, and James and I did one previous film, which Spectacular Now, which had a lot of sort of conversation in it as well between two people, is to allow those conversations to feel as real as possible. So in a lot of editing, sometimes the dialogue is there to propel the story, and so it's really most important that the dialogue be delivering information that the audience then can interpret into story points. Here, and just what I get a lot of, much more pleasure out of editing is to let expression, inconsistencies or inaccuracies in speech sort of come through and do the work, telling you where the character's mindset is at, and to let those things be part of the story, and to let the cuts sort of match a kind of natural rhythm in conversation. This movie was probably the best sort of stage for me to do that kind of editing. I mean, I usually try to do it, but to have conversations of this quality and performances that were this natural to work with gave me an opportunity to do that. So it really was just about making it feel that you were sitting in the room with those two people and watching two real people have a conversation.
I actually had a similar question, but I was actually, as a filmmaker, you're all filmmakers, sorry. I just mean, when you're looking at a script where it's basically people talking, what do you see? I have a hard time envisioning what that looks like for the audience, even though I'm totally into the characters and the conversation and all of that. Just from a technical sort of director perspective. And I'm also wondering where you separate out exposition from, as a performer, it's difficult. That's the worst thing about dialogue is when you're giving that exposition, like how do you, as a performer, make that just as real as the rest of, is this what any of this was? Actually, I have so many things in my head I want to ask you.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I saw this brief documentary once about Waldo Salt, who's one of my heroes, Broken Night Cowboy, and his process in writing script was amazing. He was obsessive. He's very, very thorough notebooks, everything about the characters. And for him, it was very important to be able to articulate, these are his words, the character's greatest human need, not just like one other need. What's the greatest human need? And for me, it's always important to find that out for the characters, to understand the subtext of what the scenes are actually about. There's the thing, and then there's the other thing, right? The thing is just the banter, it's the pop culture. The other thing is generally to struggle for power, And it's really figuring out dictates the perspective, where the camera's going to go, whose story we're telling. It's just some of the questions that I ask first when I read the script.
Can you also address a little bit just about the look of the film? I mean, it's a very beautiful film, and it looks a particular way. Where, I mean, I can feel the cold and kind of emptiness of that apartment. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I I had a couple of great collaborators, several great collaborators as far as the look of the film. Great costume designer, great production designer, Gary Sullivan, who did this film. This year called Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. He did an art director on Grand Budapest Hotel, and our cinematographer Jakob Giri is a Swedish cinematographer who works with Joaquin Trier. They did a film called Reprise and also August 31st. And we had long conversations about snow. I mean, there were several things that were, imperative from the get-go. I actually, strangely, don't look back to the David Becker Bob Dylan doc. It was a real frame of reference. It's just like, good God, I love being in the car with that guy. I love hearing his perspective on fame. I love hearing him BS people. I love seeing him be a jerk. I love seeing all of that, but it's like I would love to be in the car with that guy. So we wanted it to feel intimate. I knew that I wanted to be handheld. I knew that I wanted a widescreen film that's 3x35, so there's a bit of texture in it. And the conversations I had, especially with Jakob and Jerry, were that the idea of winter, and I think a lot of times in American independent films, I'm totally generalizing here, winter and snow are used as some metaphor for like existential despair or something. And I was like, but there's when I watch Bergman movies or Lucas Moodysson films, Scandinavian films, snow has a completely different meaning. It's very romantic, when I watch White Christmas, it's so romantic, and that's sort of how we wanted it to feel. And actually, the film, there were a couple sort of two-handers that Jakob and I talked about, a couple Wong Kar-wai films actually. No one would ever get this from seeing the movie, but it was actually really important that our color palette, where we could, it's the now, the Midwest, winter, a lot of whites and grays are just going to be there, but where we could introduce color and warmth, in Wallace's kitchen, there's sort of these pale blues and yellows, things like that. They're very subtle. The goal was to make a film that you want to live in, not one that's oppressive and pushing you back, but it's actually inviting you in and has as much warmth as you can when you're in a polar vortex.
We probably have time for a couple more. Does anyone on the balcony want to yell out a question?
Well, I thought it was really important that it not be an impression, and I think that anything that felt dishonest, I just think you would have smelled a mile away, and it would have been. The thing I really didn't want it to seem like is like watch Jason Segel try to do acting, and like I just think I just think you would have seen it. So I tried more to focus on the parts of me that felt like were the same, and as opposed to strive to be something that was outside of myself, just try to really pay attention to the parts of me that were the same. Because I feel like we're talking about like such fundamental human issues. It's like you said, it shouldn't have to be David Foster Wallace. It should be, he was able to articulate these feelings, but I think they're very universal human feelings we all have. So I tried to pay attention to the feelings, I guess. And then I paid a lot of attention to the videos and audio that I had access to, because I felt like there was a really particular music to the way he spoke, and I've never seen anybody be able to speak in like fully coherent arguments with like a thesis and supporting points and a conclusion, and still have it sound conversational. But like really, so to me, the only way to accomplish that was to really understand what I was saying, and not just rattle off words, because I think that would have been really boring. I just think it would have been listening to me repeat smart ideas.
All the way in the front.
first of all, Jason, I've long admired you as a comic actor. You should not in any way fear that you have come up with a false actor in this role. This is your most accomplished performance. I was a little befuddled by the scene with the shoe, so I was wondering if some insight could be provided that. And also, I'm kind of fascinated by your own shoes. They look amazingly distressed. I was wondering if you could talk about them.
Yeah, I'll start with mine. I've been waiting for this question for 10 years. So I bought these shoes like when I was 23 or something like that. And I know that you can buy shoes that have this effect, but I've worn these for like 10 or 12 years or something like that, and this is what they look like now. These are my friends.
To your first question, you know, Lipsky left a copy of his novel, The Art Fair. It was a wonderful novel, and I think was really waiting to hear something, anything that did Foster Wallace. Hopefully, affirmation, good job, buddy, I love the book. He didn't hear that. I think that's what he was going for. What he got was one of his lowest. That's it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
All right, let's take one last one all the way back.
Perhaps everyone knows, familiar with this other than me, but I gathered that Foster Wallace committed suicide.
Yes, he committed suicide in 2008.
Was that a question?
Anything else about shoes? First of all, really, one scene that particularly struck me, again, where Lucy is going to the house and just having everything, and you know, like reading describing the stories, and it just felt to me like it was a little bit jarring because it felt very, it was like technical proficiency, if you're doing it, this is how you read it, but then it also felt very meta because I realized that we see these things and we don't have the instructions that kind of created from this description. So I just thought that was a really interesting way to kind of bookend and take you back out. And I was wondering just kind of your thoughts on that. And kind of, it seems like it's like the other side of the character where he's sneaky and doing his job. So if you just keep rolling with that. Around like a thief, right? I mean, that's part of the demands of his job. I've talked to a lot of journalists who've seen this film who could all relate to that sequence. For me, it's there's a surprising amount of emotion that I wasn't even prepared for, I think, in that, because I think in the same way that Jason talked about preparation for the role, there's certain superficial physical things, the cadence of speech, physical mannerisms that are important to get right. It was really understanding the psychology of the character, where he was coming from, and I think this desperate need that Lipsky had, even after all that, to just catalog the stuff, the material stuff of this man, as though somehow that would tell him who this guy was. It feels sad and true. I mean, that's what's left at the end for all of us, right? It's just this is the clutter of our life. I mean, this is strange. I mean, when we shot that sequence, the final part where Jesse goes into the bathroom and there's Clinton's baboons and that St. Ignatius quote. These were all details. These were production design details. There were things that were there. When we actually, usually I was next to the camera as close as I could be, but because it was a tight space, it was on a handheld monitor, sort of watching from outside during that. And when Jesse went in and started reading that quote, I just lost it. I started crying like loudly, and like I thought I screwed up a take, and I still don't know exactly what it was. And Jesse came out afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, James, was that?" He was gonna ask me, "Was it good?" And he just saw that I was crying, and he got me really uncomfortable. I turned around, and there was something that I see on Jesse's face in that, you know, of him being someone at age 30 who felt maybe insecure in his own place in his career, that was, comparing himself against this other guy that thought that he could get him, he could get the story, that maybe this guy was a fraud. And then finding this quote that I'm sure on some like ironic, detached level, he thought probably at first was kitsch, probably the thing that I would maybe think, and then realizing that no, this was actually maybe very sincere, and that this was someone who was working really hard to stay mentally healthy and alive every day, and that perhaps Lipsky had really squandered a lot of the time that he had with David Foster Wallace chasing the wrong story. I feel a lot of regret on Jesse's face that I can relate. Thank you for the question.
Has the family seen the film or come to one of the screenings? Have you
Has
spoken
the
with them?
family seen the film?
Yeah.
Yeah, one member of David Foster Wallace's family has seen the film. I liked it. I thought Jason was really great. Thank you.
Well, we agree. Thank you so much.